Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. Here's what we're looking at. TSA agents are getting back pay, but the DHS shutdown lingers. A look at where negotiations in Congress stand. And what happens when prediction markets allow you to bet on virtually anything. First off tonight, a federal judge rules the Trump administration's move to end federal funding for PBS and NPR was unconstitutional. Judge Randolph Moss says Trump's executive order last year was unlawful because it directed federal agencies to terminate funding to NPR and PBS because the president believed their news coverage was, quote, left-wing. But the judge says the First Amendment, quote, does not tolerate viewpoint discrimination and retaliation of this type. The ruling, however, does not reverse the decision by Congress to pull back federal funding for the organizations, but it could impact future federal dollars for public media. The White House did not immediately comment. Family, friends, and other first responders gather to lay firefighter Michael Altman to rest. The 32-year-old member of the Chicago Fire Department was killed earlier this month during a blaze at a Rogers Park apartment building. His funeral had originally been scheduled for last week, but was postponed after his wife went into labor. The service in Oak Lawn was private, but supporters gathered along the funeral procession route. Altman was a fourth-generation member of the Chicago Fire Department. A suspect has been charged with homicide and arson in connection with the fire that claimed Altman's life. It's not an April Fool's joke. Tomorrow marks the beginning of Chicago's street sweeping schedule. So if you're street parking, be sure to be on the lookout for those bright orange no parking signs. If you don't, be ready to get hit with a $50 to $60 fine. Street sweeping runs through the end of November. For a ward-by-ward schedule, check out our website. 3 Chicago chefs are being nominated for the annual James Beard Awards, and they may be familiar faces. The prestigious awards are often referred to as the Oscars of the culinary world. This year's finalists include Bailey Sullivan as emerging chef at Monteverde Restaurant and Pastificio in the West Loop. You may recognize her as a finalist on last year's culinary competition show, Top Chef. And Chicago also has 2 nominees for the Best Chef Great Lakes category. Norman Fenton, chef at Cariño in Uptown, and Jacob Potashnik, chef at Feld in Westtown. Both appeared on the Apple TV series Knife Edge, Chasing Michelin Stars. Winners will be revealed at a ceremony June 15th. Monday's weather wasn't just nice, it was record-setting. According to the National Weather Service, the temperature hit 81 degrees at O'Hare Airport. That's Chicago's official weather station. That broke a previous high for March 30th of 79 degrees set in 1986. But temperatures dropped today with showers and storms this afternoon continuing into the evening, with some expected to be severe, and showers remain in the forecast for the next couple of days. Up next, a conversation with Congresswoman Delia Ramirez recorded earlier today.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
A new record for the longest federal funding lapse in U.S. history. The Department of Homeland Security has now gone 46 days without full funding, surpassing the previous 43-day shutdown that ended in November. The partial shutdown began in February after a federal immigration crackdown in Minnesota left 2 U.S. citizens dead. Democrats say they won't fund the Department of Homeland Security without reforms to immigration and customs enforcement. Republicans argue the proposed changes would endanger ICE agents and the public. Joining us via Zoom to discuss the negotiations are Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, a Democrat representing parts of Chicago's West Side. We also invited all the Republican members of Illinois' congressional delegation, but they either declined or did not respond. Congresswoman Ramirez, thank you for joining us again. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, as we mentioned, this partial shutdown of DHS, now the longest in the country's history. Both chambers of Congress on a 2-week recess around the Easter holiday. Do you think lawmakers should return to D.C., or are things just at such a stalemate that it might not make a difference?
Look, I think we absolutely should return to D.C. and do everything in our power to make sure the our TSA workers, our Coast Guard, FEMA, and CISA, cybersecurity, is funded. But the reality is that our speaker has no interest in doing that. The other thing I think is really important to clarify for people is that Donald Trump, 44 days ago, could have issued this executive order. TSA workers should never have gone through what they're going through right now. They've already gone through this stuff before in November, and to have them go through this again is pure evil from the president. That executive order, that money, he had the money to do this. He just wanted to put enough pressure so that he can get more money for ICE at the expense of federal workers.
Well, you mentioned TSA workers who finally started receiving pay this week, but of course there are hundreds of thousands of DHS employees, many of whom aren't being paid. Are you concerned about those, employees outside of TSA simply leaving and finding other work?
Yeah, look, under the president and under Kristi Noem, certainly I don't see a difference coming in through Mark Wayne Mullen. DHS workers have lived in really hostile conditions for a very long time, being demanded to do things or to redirect their money to other departments instead of actually funding FEMA or cybersecurity. Look, I've had committee hearings. I serve in Homeland Security where we've had the interim supervisor or administrator for TSA as well as the director for CISA and FEMA there. And they have admitted that their money for their funding, their mission, has been redirected to ICE and CBP for more ICE enforcement. The reality is that there's been a lot of instability for a very long time. And this obsession with getting more money for ICE, despite of the $150 billion of taxpayer dollars that were funded in July, is not just inappropriate and unacceptable, it's criminal to the workers that need to get paid into the contracts that we should be honoring, especially when we're talking about FEMA.
So the Senate very early this past Friday morning passed a proposal to fund DHS, except for ICE and parts of Customs and Border Protection. All the Senate Republicans supported it, but Speaker Mike Johnson and Republican leadership in the House rejected it. Would you have supported something along the lines of the Senate plan?
Look, interesting that you're asking that question. I think that the intention of the bill was good, but I read every line in the bill. And unfortunately, indirectly, there was language in that Senate bill that would allow procurement for more CBP funding and would give Mullen emergency authority to be able to move money to ICE and CBP if there was some form of emergency, a protest that went bad, or the president decides that a particular state is in a state of emergency and all of a sudden he needs to send more agents to be able to terrorize that community. So the answer is I would not have voted for that bill because there were some concerns with some of the language. That's usually what happens when you put together a bill in a very last short minute and there's unintended things within the bill itself. The intention of not funding ICE and CBP, I applaud, and the urgency of funding FEMA, TSA, Coast Guard, and CISA, I certainly applaud as well. And I hope to have a clean bill that does just that. It just can't be at the expense of a secretary who also operates in the same way as the former secretary did. The agency is running as a corrupt agency. You can't give them the kind of authorities that allow them to move money.
House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said this weekend, called the Senate's proposal weak. Meantime, on the Senate side, no GOP senators have appeared interested in taking up a stopgap proposal out of the House. Are you surprised to see some tensions arising between House and Senate Republicans?
I'm not surprised because you've also seen some tensions within Democrats in the House and Senate. I mean, we've been asking senators to hold the line, especially around what we have seen with ICE enforcement around the country, especially in Chicago, places like Minneapolis. But the reality is that Speaker Johnson works for just one person, not the House of Representatives and not his constituents. It's Donald Trump. And Donald Trump wants to create all the conditions of pressure to fully fund and fund more ICE and CBP because he wants this paramilitary police to also be able to show up just like nothing at airports, maybe at polling locations and around the country, terrorizing people at a time where I think that they're really afraid that they may lose the majority come November. Speaker Johnson has no real reason for not moving something along to fund TSA workers, to fund FEMA, to fund cybersecurity and Coast Guard, except that he wants to make sure he does whatever Donald Trump wants. Donald Trump said, I got $150 billion for ICE. I want more. Get me more. And so Johnson caved, as Johnson tends to do every day in Congress.
Another major issue I want to make sure we touch on. Over the weekend, President Trump said U.S.-Iran negotiations were going extremely well. Iranian officials have denied any such negotiations. Today, the U.S. bombing another Iranian city, Isfahan. Do you think there are any sort of negotiations actually underway?
Look, we're hearing from the news, not from our own briefings in Congress, which we should be briefed every single week. But we're hearing that Pakistan is trying to engage a negotiation between Iran and the U.S. However, there's nothing that shows us that there's really a pathway and a plan from Donald Trump to get us out of this war as quickly as possible. With that said, Nick, gas is $4. $4 right now, and in some cases you're seeing it at $4.24 in some of the smaller gas stations around the country. Donald Trump is telling other partners and allies, get your own oil, because this has always been about him profiting, his family profiting, and his donors profiting. And the reality is that Donald Trump is also talking about a potential ground invasion, where that doesn't actually help us get closer to some kind of negotiation and a peace deal. That talks about a full-on war, a regional war that would put more service members, but people in this country truly at risk of our own lives. So I'm very concerned. And I think that we need to go back to Congress as soon as possible. We need to actually pass a war powers resolution, because the president should not be calling all the shots, especially when it comes to war. And Speaker Johnson has to stand up for Congress, not for the president, and say enough is enough.
All right, Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, that's where we'll have to leave it. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, how prediction markets have become mainstream. How warm will it be in Chicago tomorrow? Will U.S. forces enter Iran next month? How many tweets will Elon Musk post this week? If you think you know the answers, prediction markets like Polymarket and Kalshi will let you put your money where your mouth is. Users win or lose money depending on how their real-world predictions pan out. Once a niche interest, prediction markets have broken through to a wider audience. Now the public and lawmakers are trying to adapt to a world where people can bet on almost anything. Joining us to talk about it all are Todd Henderson, a professor of law at the University of Chicago, Carl Lockhart, a professor of law at DePaul University, and Dr. Zain Nayani, an addiction specialist at Rush University. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Very interesting topic to dig into. Okay, so Todd, take us through it. How exactly do these prediction markets work?
So the idea is just to simply capitalize on the wisdom of the crowds. You've probably seen a game show where someone asks, can we ask the audience for their opinion? And the audience helps out. And what we've found is that if you poll a large number of people, you can get surprising accuracy on complicated things. You ask one person how much the space shuttle weighs, you're not going to get the right answer, even if that person's an expert. You ask millions of people and take the average, you're likely to get it. So it's capitalizing on that. And the simple setup is a company will, like Kalshi or Polymarket, will set out a contract. How many tweets will Elon Musk do tomorrow? And they'll say, if he makes more than 1,000, this contract pays $1. If he makes less than that, it pays $0. And then those contracts are traded in the market. And if the contract's trading for 52 cents, and you're sure that he's going to make more than 1,000 tweets tomorrow, you'll buy that at 52 cents because that contract will pay you $1. So it's a simple contract for a set prediction in the future, and then let those trade in the market and capitalize on the wisdom of crowds.
I'm not sure it's possible to count how many tweets he sends, but if we could.
If it can be determined to be a fact of the world, then it's good for a prediction market.
Right. So Carl, these prediction markets, they've become much more widespread since 2024 or so. What changed from a legal standpoint that led to this?
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, so back in 2024 in May, the Biden administration put out a rule trying to ban prediction markets for sports and political related bets. That rule it was just proposed, it never became a final rule. And later that year in the summer, Kalshi tried to offer its first contract on the presidential election and who would win the presidential election. And the CFTC tried to stop them from offering that contract. Kalshi litigated that, and they won in district court in the District of Columbia. And so that allowed them to have prediction markets on the election in 2024. And that was a big publicity boost for Kalshi. And once they'd done that, they moved on to sort of the next thing, which was sports-related contracts for the 2025 Super Bowl. They started offering prediction market contracts on the Super Bowl and have expanded to all sorts of sports-related contracts now.
So even if, for example, your state hasn't legalized sports betting, you can sort of work around that with something like Polymarket or Kalshi, perhaps?
That's absolutely correct. So I'm originally from Texas. Texas has no sports gambling allowed in it at all. But if you're 18 or older in Texas, now you can use Kalshi or Polymarket to place bets on sporting events.
You know, Dr. Nayani, when it comes to the public health risk or the potential personal problems, is there a difference between, say, traditional gambling and predicting on a market like this?
Yeah, I think that from an actual public health standpoint and a medical standpoint, the way that it affects your brain is pretty much the exact same. So while the semantics of its policy nature may be different, the approach of how kind of we take from like me being a doctor is your action is basically the same. It's just being done in a different way, but the way it's going to affect your brain is the same exact way. So I think biologically, neurobiologically, it's the same.
So, for example, if someone is aware that they have, a gambling issue, this is the kind of thing that they should be staying away from, even though it's technically something, or referred to as something different.
Definitely, it'll activate the same parts of your brain as any other gambling would.
Todd, these prediction markets, they offer bets on everything from, as we just said, sports games to things far more consequential like military strikes. What types of things do you think are appropriate for these prediction markets?
So what's amazing is this came out of research that was inside of companies. Hewlett-Packard wanted to predict how many printers they would sell. And you could ask salespeople, you could ask the executives, you could poll your customers. It turned out making a market of just those same people was very good at predicting, much better than any other method at predicting how many printers would be sold. Something as prosaic as that, but really important for Hewlett-Packard. And then other companies, Google, lots of companies have deployed prediction markets to predict any number of internal things that then bled out of companies into things like politics, and now they're used for everything. I think personally, I'm a huge fan of prediction markets in the sense that they mobilize the wisdom of crowds to predict things that are hugely consequential, whether it's foreign policy or elections or how much it's going to rain in Illinois this spring, something very impactful for farmers. So I think they can be used in a whole range of things. Where I would probably agree with my colleague is the realm of sports, the realm of securities prices, like what the price of NVIDIA is going to be tomorrow. We already have markets for those. The stock market predicts the value of NVIDIA. There are gambling markets already with rules. I just got back from Las Vegas. There's a world of gambling. Some states have legalized them. That seems like a separate category. So I think we should be in favor of prediction markets for the power they have to predict things, but for areas that aren't the stock market, that aren't sports betting, and focus on those, because it is a hugely powerful tool.
Well, several bets with unusual timing have raised questions over insider information. That includes $400,000 bets on Nicolas Maduro's ouster in January, hours before it happened. 6 accounts made $1.2 million on bets placed hours before strikes on Iran, and also $500 million in total bets on oil prices minutes before a Trump tweet that he'd delay attacks on Iran's energy assets. Carl, do we think there's insider information being used in these markets?
Absolutely. I mean, I think without a doubt these markets have insiders that are trading on them. And I think that what we're seeing is Kalshi and Polymarket and the federal government and states trying to regulate them and trying to figure out the best way to make sure that insiders aren't being able to profit off of information that they've essentially taken wrongfully from their companies, their employers, or from their government position. And that's something that is an evolving issue, and it's something that the markets themselves are trying to work on. So Kalshi, for example, is proposing, has rooted out some insider trading, and they're also proposing certain bans on people placing buying contracts on these markets if they have inside information. So it's definitely an evolving issue.
So it seems like they feel like they have at least some incentive to try and regulate insider information on their own?
I think they do, because if you have only insiders, or if markets that have the potential for inside information to be used, one thing that could worry people who are just, ordinary citizens trying to use these markets is that if they're all being essentially rigged, if they all have insiders that are going to make better bets than they can, why would you participate in those markets? And so there is sort of a self-regulatory feature to them that if people begin to see these markets as being completely dominated by insiders, they're not going to want to place money on them.
Yeah, how about that?
A Supreme Court justice once said that no one would willingly play in a loaded dice game. And I think that captures, what he was saying. Self-regulation has its role. It's not a panacea, and so maybe there is some role for the government to regulate. Also, if insiders, and I think he captured the idea right, that the information about what the U.S.'s plans are in Iran, or a company's, it's analogous to securities markets, what a company's plans are, that information really belongs to that company or the American people. And having insiders profit from that might be a violation of their sort of ethical obligations to be a member of the Pentagon or a public servant. We've seen legislation in Congress to restrict congressional insider trading. Something like that might make sense here too. I would just note, though, there's a paradox, which is if we really want to know whether an event's going to happen, it's the insiders who have the information about that event who we want to encourage to reveal that information. So we don't want someone bombing Karg Island because they made a bet on Kalshi that they're going to profit from. But if you know that the United States is going to engage in some kind of activity, and it's publicly good to reveal that, maybe war plans would not be an example of that, then having the insiders trade would be a good thing. So I think it's a delicate balance to strike. And there's a bunch of bets on these poly markets now that are called prop bets. Mm-hmm. Like, will Elon Musk tweet about the Iran war tomorrow? Well, Elon Musk is 100% in control of that. And those are particularly bad bets. Yeah. In this regard, and so I think we should be especially leery of those.
Dr. Nayani, does whether you win or lose money change sort of the risks of participating in these prediction markets for folks?
I don't think so, and I think the best way to compare it to is just kind of how the brain reacts to sports betting. We have seen that in situations where you would think that, yes, like losing would be something that would make you not want to partake anymore. It's actually not the actual act of winning or losing, it's the thrill and the reward-seeking mechanisms that are in the brain that get activated. Mm-hmm. So for example, even though you lost $1,000, for example, your brain still gets the same thrill of having that like gratification, whether it be in the moment having a win or having a loss, but thinking, okay, I can make up the difference with my next bet.
And would the risks change if regulations make prediction markets harder to access, or if there are more guardrails?
I'm not sure if the risk itself would change in the moment, but I think that what it would do is it would help us as a society not reach the younger adults who are a particular target and who are not developed yet mentally to the point where they can make those good decisions for themselves. So maybe in the moment of the person who's already been affected, it wouldn't necessarily change things, but it would help to really take that risk away from the people who are a lot more vulnerable.
We've got just under a minute left. I want to come back to something that you brought up earlier, though, the idea of election predictions. Are there any concerns that big bets on elections might sway voters?
It's always an issue that comes up, and when there used to be these old prediction markets that were just about politics and the liquidity, that is the dollar amount at stake, was very low, the probability of a big, Elon Musk or George Soros really affecting the price, it was a real thing. But we saw that a couple of times where the probability of, say, Mitt Romney winning went sky high, and that just was profit opportunity for everybody who knew that Obama was going to win. And so it pretty quickly went down. So these markets, if they're liquid enough, I think correct themselves a little bit. But I just wanted to say one thing about that point about the young people. what's I think interesting is we want these to predict the future based on people who have actual information. 18-year-olds don't have great information about what the weather is or what things are going to happen in Iran. So I think the regulation could align with the public health, but still serve the public purpose of the prediction markets.
Yeah, a lot of questions with these as they've become so widespread. Thank you for helping us to answer some of them. Todd Henderson, Carl Lockhart, and Dr. Zain Nayani.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. One-on-one with the Republican candidate running for U.S. Senate in Illinois, Don Tracy. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is a multilingual law firm providing translators for a variety of languages.